Hi, I'm Josh Fonger, and I'm about to have a productive conversation with Mike Barty.
Welcome to A Productive Conversation. Today, I'm thrilled to bring you a conversation filled with valuable insights as I sit down and share a virtual space with Josh Fonger, the esteemed business performance architect and CEO of WTS Enterprises. We delve deep into the art and science of implementing effective work management systems and adopting a systems mindset, both crucial for personal and business success. We can't forget about the personal part. Josh shares practical wisdom on creating robust systems that not only streamline your day-to-day operations, but also set you up for sustained growth and freedom. We get into the freedom part. We get into all this stuff. And you'll want to stick around to the very end where Josh reveals the game-changing impact of systematic thinking on entrepreneurs who are working not just in their business, but on their business. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. Here's my productive conversation with Josh Fonger. Enjoy. Josh, thanks so much for taking the time to join me on this episode of A Productive Conversation.
Yeah, glad to be here. Should be fun.
All right, so I'm holding right now in my hands the book "Work the System" by Sam Carpenter. Now, I've seen Sam's work come in and out. If you've been in the productivity and time management space for a while, anybody who's looked at it has probably come across "Work the System." To what degree are you involved with the Work the System kind of organization? And like, it's become, I mean, not unlike Getting Things Done, David Allen's Getting Things Done, I mean, it was a book and then it became more and more. And that seems to be what's happened with Work the System as well, right?
Yeah. Well, I can't take credit for the book. Certainly, Sam Carpenter originated that based on life experience. I think first edition was 2008. And he and I met in 2011. And that's when his second edition was nearing completion. And at that time, he was having a situation where people were really liking the book, but then they wanted help. They wanted some coaching. They wanted some consulting. They wanted events. They wanted someone to fly out there and help them. And he said, "Hey, Josh, I didn't write this book to get another job. I just wrote this book to help people." And so he and we met in Bend, Oregon, where I was living at the time. And he said, "How about you go do the consulting? And, I'll drop in if people need some help. And otherwise, you can go do it." And so that's basically when I started with him in 2011. He and I talk every week still. But that was the beginning. I started off as a contractor for him doing consulting work. And then I became an employee of Work the System. Then I, started my own consulting company in 2016, WTS Enterprises. And that's all based on the book and based on how people get more efficient and more productive with the WTS method.
So I want to kind of dive into your experience with WTS because obviously you were a fan. Obviously you've put it through the paces. What led you down that path? Because I mean, there's no shortage even back then in 2008, like in that, especially with, 2008, the early part, that was where I think the internet productivity kind of really started to show a rise, right? You had, like, Merlin Mann was clearly blogging about 43 folders. 2008, where was I in 2008? So it's 15. I was just getting started, actually, looking at the productivity stuff with Lifehacker was coming into play and all that. So there was no shortage. What kind of what about Work the System kind of gravitated towards you and you said, this is something that makes sense to me and I want to dive deeper into it?
Yeah. Well, so what's the quick answer? I was already a traveling consultant, so I was helping flooring stores, carpet ones, and Flooring Americas around the country. So I was flying from location to location, helping them with inside sales and outside sales and financial forecasting, and helping them with leadership development and vision, values, mission, you name it. I was kind of the traveling consultant guy for flooring stores. And what I was noticing is that whether it was a few months or a few years after I got done working with these clients, they would be back to where they were before. So I thought I had made a big improvement and it was short-lived. Once an employee would leave or a manager would leave or, a new product switch or whatever it was, they would start to go back into old habits. And I realized after talking to Sam, and he and I became friends before we started working together, that I was missing a critical aspect, which is documenting the systems of the business. Don't just talk about it. Don't just train people. Don't just, help them with a few tweaks to their, the pricing, their merchandising. You actually have to document the systems that they're going to stick because people come and go. And that was an aspect of the business that I had not really focused a lot on. And I realized that ultimately building these assets was way more valuable to the longevity and the health and the transferability and growth and scalability and everything else if I actually did that, as opposed to just focusing on training a few salespeople and then expecting that to make the company grow.
Right. Why do you think people have such a challenging time with adopting a systems mindset? I mean, we live in a world, you even said like there was something that you really weren't thinking about that part of the business, right? We live in a world where there's a reactivity. There's almost like there's no moment to pause and like reflect and fine tune our processes and things like that. And I mean, which is hilarious to me in some respect, because when you think about it, it's those things like processes, systems, frameworks that have been proven time and time and time again. I mean, I remember talking to Michael Gerber about the E-Myth stuff. I worked for Costco for a number of years. I mean, there's systems and processes in place that have led to success. Why do you think so many people have a hard time kind of leaning into a systems mindset or into those things? And what's a revolutionary kind of like, or not a revolutionary, but kind of like a epiphany that someone can have? They were like, you know what? I need to lean into systems mind thinking more. I need to lean into this as opposed to just kind of playing whack-a-mole, because I think that's what happens.
Yeah, I wish that there was a way you could self-induce it easier.
Yeah.
But I would say the majority of my clients, almost all of them, they come after a big problem happens.
Right.
So after they lose a big client, they're like, we just had this system in place, we would have had a consistent result. Or after one of their key managers leaves, or after the business breakup, or you name it. There's some big problem that happens, a health issue, and they're like, I can't keep doing things the way I'm doing them. I need to figure this out. They're willing to go from just chasing the next dollar, or chasing the next shiny object, or chasing the next instinctual thing that they've always done before, and then they're willing to slow down, because it does require you to slow down. It does require you to simplify. It does require you to stay consistent. And one of the things that makes entrepreneurs and small businesses thrive in the beginning is different than what's going to make them grow in the kind of the middle to end period of their trajectory. And what makes them do well in the beginning is their ability to rapidly change direction, to innovate, to be flexible, to cater to every single client, to basically be whatever their clients want to be. They can be that tomorrow because they don't have any infrastructure. And so what I'm asking them to do is say, hey, now that you have built this team that are all a bunch of just, firefighters, we have to shift and actually decide based on everything you've done so far, what actually is a clear, straight path going forward. Let's solidify that strategy. What actually do you want, strategically, do you want your values, your principles to be? Let's document those, and let's actually build out a series of processes that will take you there, as opposed to, somebody just called me, they need this, let's figure out how to make that happen. It's like, well, now you're letting the tail wag the dog. You're basically a business that's based on whatever your client wants, instead of you deciding what your business is going to be.
Right. And that is interesting, because you hear a lot of like, ask the client what they want, ask the client what they want, ask your audience, whatever, whether you're a creator or whether you're running a business. And then all of a sudden there is this idea of, but to a point, right? To a point. Like you have to, there's only so much time we have. I imagine that setting this stuff up also creates boundaries that are far easier for you to follow than not. And I think that systems in place will allow for that, kind of, it'll keep you from deviating, off of, like you said, your values, your mission. Again, qualitative stuff that is hard to kind of, at least initially, look at from the bottom line and go, well, we need to spend time on this, right? We need to look at this. You mentioned in the epilogue of the book, this is the 4th edition I'm holding on to, when you work, like there's 6 key pillars that people need to kind of, whether it's a business at large or whether it's an individual, and this can work on both sides of the scale. It doesn't have to be a big company. It could be you operating as you. What are those pillars? And out of the pillars that you list, which one do you think is the one that people are going to find the most challenging to stick to and/or craft?
Okay. Well, you're going to test my memory here because it's probably 3 or 4 years ago when I wrote that. So the first pillar I'm assuming I put in there is you need to have the systems mindset.
That's true.
And then
Yes.
develop that into.
Correct.
Okay. You can test me on this. So first thing is to see your world differently. Of course, if you're constantly reacting, this can be personal life and business life, then mention the tail wagging the dog. You're not actually seeing the separate components that make up your life. Instead, you're just reacting. So that's the first thing is to get that outside and slightly elevated viewpoint and realize that there's a linear, chronological, step-by-step way things are happening throughout your day and your business. And the way to have a perfect day, perfect business, perfect life would be to define actually where you want to get and then to work on those systems. So systems mindset, then probably the next one is going to be the strategic objective. So actually writing down, where do I actually want to get to? Most people have it in their head, but it's cloudy and it changes. And it changes depending on what their clients want and the seasonality. And it's impossible to build a team and infrastructure and make choices that are going to be investments towards making that a reality unless you write down that strategy and people buy into it. So we call it the strategic objective. A lot of other people out there have different versions of this. Maybe they call it their strategic plan, or maybe their 5-year plan or vision, values, mission, all that stuff. But Sam Carpenter has a really sharp way to make it into one page that encapsulates everything you're going to need to know so that if the owner goes take a year cruise and maybe goes by Victoria, right? They can know that everyone who's left there at the office can follow that one-page plan,
right,
make it happen.
Right.
And then rapid fire from there, operating principles,
Yep.
basically defining the culture as opposed to just letting every person who come on board come up with their own best way to do things. You actually say, hey, you know what, we're actually going to be a company that focuses on time management or technology or efficiency or whatever it is. And that's going to be a key aspect to your business success. After that, you don't need to have some processes. Like what is the standard work? What is the standard way to do every single thing? A simple analogy is a restaurant. You can't have 5 different ways to make the cheeseburger. You should just figure out what is our way. And let's just perfect it. Let's get better and better and better at doing this recipe. And that's what allows it to scale. After that, if you don't have people who are going to do it, then you're still stuck doing it all yourself. And that's not going to be a way to produce more value in the world and also scale your enterprise. And so you actually need to have people who buy into the strategy, follow the principles, are willing to do the procedures and help you write and review and approve and optimize them. And that's going to be a key aspect. And it's not always easy to find a person who wants to follow a process. And again, usually those newer entrepreneurial businesses, those people are less process driven typically than when you get into larger companies. People are more comfortable with process. And then lastly, you need to actually invest, whether it's your time or your talent, your resources. You need to actually invest in building this infrastructure because in theory, it sounds great, but it actually takes some effort. We call it the heavy lifting phase of a company. And not everyone's willing to do that. Most people like the idea, but they're kind of stuck in their habits and they don't necessarily want to invest in their systems.
When you work with somebody, what's the thing that kind of makes the light bulb go off in their head when they're working through the work the system process? What's their light bulb moment? I mean, I'm sure there's probably varying, but there's probably one that kind of stands out, I would imagine, right?
Yeah, the one that makes it stick the most, and people usually start working with me as their consultant or coach after they've already it's clicked, that something's happened for them. But when I'm working with them to solidify it, it's something that they do every single day, every single week. And I want to identify that one thing and I want to get that into a documented system. And then I want to delegate it to someone else so they can see, oh, this really wasn't that hard. It took me, 15 minutes or whatever to document the system. And now I save myself a half hour a week or a day, every day for the rest of my life. And then I like to kind of run the math in that. So like, what was that system worth to you? If this is going to be run the next 10 years, okay, that one procedure is worth 80 grand or whatever it is. Okay, we probably should keep doing this. You don't feel 80 grand in your pocket the next day, but that's how much value was created by actually codifying that system and delegating it.
Well, and what I like about what you just did there was you added the quantitative element to it because a lot of times when I mean, when I've taught people like the idea of time crafting or whatever, or when you've worked with people, I'm sure that a lot of the stuff, it's just like, yeah, but I need to check off as many boxes as possible because that's what productivity is. Or I need to use every moment of my time needs to be showing, obvious forward progress, even though some of the forward progress, like you just mentioned, isn't quite as obvious. So why, again, to crack that nut of quantitative productivity versus qualitative productivity, which is kind of like what you want to have a balance of that. That sounds like that's what you've achieved with that by just saying, look, you've built this thing. How much is it worth? How much is it worth now? How much is it going to be worth? And that's enticing for a business owner that is really focused, ultimately, you have to make money. The bottom line matters. So I like that approach because a lot of people struggle with using the wrong measurement, right? Like using the wrong, they'll look at their email inbox. And this is, again, back in the early days, get your email to inbox zero. Well, yeah, but that's not what Merlin meant by inbox zero. He didn't mean get your email to zero, but the appeal is there because if you have 163 emails in your inbox and you get that down to zero, you can count that. So that feels, quote, good. In this case, it's not really tricking them, but you've said, like, look, you've done this thing and look how much money it's going to help. Would you like to do something else? So it sounds like that's kind of the process involved. And it's not all done at once, I would imagine, either.
Yeah, it can't be. If you try to eat too much of the elephant at once, you get sick, right?
Yep.
So we slow and steady wins the race. And we definitely try to break apart for all companies, whether it's the managers or the owners and the leadership team, the separate pieces that make up their life, personal and business, but usually more business. And then to work a plan, Sam refers to it as automate, delegate, delete. I would add in there optimize, but the whole thing is first, is there something you can completely remove from your list? Because usually there's things people do that they've always done that they actually don't need to do at all, really. Once they take a clear look at that strategic objective and they realize, I'm on this podcast right now.
Yep.
I used to do a podcast every week, and I realized actually to get my name out there, get the book out there, and to reach new audiences, if I do an episode once a month, it's just as valuable as once a week, and I save a bunch of time. So I was like, well, actually, I don't need to do it that often, because in the end, what is the goal of what I'm trying to achieve? And so eliminating things, which doesn't mean stopping them completely, but maybe it's just, hey, instead of doing that social media post 3 times a day, maybe just twice a week, but you'll do the same results, and you'll be able to work on other things too.
What about somebody who's transitioning from one focus to another? So let's say that they've got a business and they're niching down. Let's say they're going to niche down from they're talking about time management, and then they're going to go, we're going to dive into time management. Let's use for medical professionals, right? So they're drilling in. So how valuable is having a systems mindset when it comes to that ability to have flexibility within, let's say, the structure of what your business kind of offers, right? Like what you're trying to do, what your goal is, right? Like if you're trying to reach, again, trying to cast a wide net for time management, you're hitting a lot of things. So I bring this up because the idea of what's the point of the podcast every week, as opposed to what's your goal. So for somebody who's shifting, how important is this to consider?
I think it's essential. I mean, in terms of the whole work system method, the big underlying theme is simplicity and congruency. So if your strategy talks about, being the best, well, then you need to say, well, what kind of people want the best? And then what kind of price point would fit the best, or what kind of employees would work in the best? So everything has to be aligned. So if you are, for instance, paying your people the highest wage, but you're charging the lowest prices for your service, you're going to have an incongruency. And I would say that's kind of from start to finish, you need to have congruency. Now, in terms of getting there faster, and this might be a roundabout way to get to your answer. Mm-hmm. I've got a client right now where she's in the mental health space and is a mental health expert, wrote a book on mental health. But in order for her to start her new consulting business, she can't be, I'm going to help entrepreneurs, business owners, leaders with their mental health, generally speaking. that's going to be a tough consulting business to start.
Mhm.
But in her case, she knows that a large part of the population, attorneys, struggle with mental health, high suicide rate, high stress, high income, high disposable income. And it's very easy because of her experience with attorneys to say, yes, I help everyone with mental health. I specialize with attorneys and law firms. And, you can make the emotional appeal. It's going to help your attorneys in your law firm not commit suicide, which is a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
But the people in the law firms also want more billable hours, more productive staff, less turnover, all those things as well. They want to see the money. So it's very clear to say, I help mental health and I focus on this. And if I was a consultant starting out, that would be the way I would go, is be really figure out the market that cares most about your service and is willing to pay the most for it to begin. Sam Carpenter does that with his answering service. He can be an answering service for anybody, and he will, but he focuses on, I think, 6 key verticals that they do want the best, they will pay the most, and then they appreciate the kind of work that his answering service does. So he kind of tailors his systems to those 6 verticals.
So I got a few more questions before we wrap up. One is, you did the case studies in this book. You walked through. Can you give me an example of a case study where you were working through it and you got when you hit it, and it's almost like the Mr. Miyagi scene at the end of Karate Kid where Miyagi's just smiling proudly that his protege has kind of done it. Like, it's a silent smile. Can you think of a moment where it went exactly the way that you figured it would, or the system worked to a way that you're like, oh, all right then? Just one of those moments where I'm sure there's something there.
Yeah. I mean, there's, at this point, there's over 10 years now, and with over 1,000 clients, there's a lot of them. But one of the ones that stuck out early on with Sam, and Sam and I worked on this one together. It was a commercial appraisal firm out of Southern California, and he had one office. He had been doing it for about, 20 years. Maybe he had 20 employees. And he had been working the 60-hour work weeks for way too long. And he realized he just couldn't go on anymore. And so he just bought in. He bought in whole scale. He's like, everyone read the book. We're going to do this no matter what. And he had strong leadership. He was consistent. He said, I believe in this. Let's make it happen. And then his team were like, okay, well, we'll make it happen. And some of his commercial appraisers who were getting paid $120,000 a year, they were documenting how they were doing these commercial appraisals, and they're realizing, hey, 90% of this work could be done with someone who's get paid $15 an hour. They're like, we really could systemize this. And they were starting to really understand the power of this internally. And he wrote me a message a few months later, and he's like, hey, what do I do with all my time now? He's like, they don't need me in the office. He's like, this is working too good. My wife's getting sick of seeing me. And then, a few months later, he really got into road biking, cycling. He got into a band. He had all his free time. And he's like, now that I've had my breather, he went back and he opened up 2 more offices. So he's like, well, I enjoy working. Yeah, I think he was like in his, early 50s. Mm-hmm. He's like, maybe I should just grow this thing now. Now that I have some time, now that I have my stress down, I could duplicate this. And that's what he did. And I was like, wow. That was pretty cool to watch that happen and to see when someone really sticks to it, what the results can be. And so that was a great, I don't think that's not in the book. So that was just, just a great way to see that, hey, putting the systems in place can make, in the beginning, the staff definitely didn't buy it. They were like, this is not going to work. We're experts in our field. We can't document our systems. We have to be the ones doing the appraisals ourselves. And once they realized they broke apart what was complicated into simple steps and separate pieces, they really could utilize a lot more lower cost labor and really boost their profit margins.
Sounds a bit like ego needs to get out of the way for this too.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I mean, Sam calls it the hero complex. If you need to be the hero, which is someone who can put out emergencies, then it's not going to work. But if you're willing to, change that and quietly give everyone else, delegate that power and delegate that responsibility and delegate that control down to your team, then the freedom happens.
So why don't more people do this out of the gate? Is it just the passion of starting the business? Is it just the emotional element of like, hey, I'm going to get, and then all of a sudden they're in it? It reminds me, I talk about this because I mean, I run my own business and there's instances where, and I mean, like I was saying to you before we record, like I really need to go through WTS a bit more because I'm sure there's lots of things in there. I know there's lots of things in there that I'm like, I should apply some of this to what I do. But it's akin to once you've been in it for so long, it feels like Christmas lights when you put them up and you're like, they're all neat and tidy. Then you put them away and they're like, why are these all tangled again? Like, what did I, and it's like, you know what? Screw it. I'm just going to throw out these Christmas lights and just buy brand new ones. Cause at least I know they're straight. And it's like, you've just thrown away completely useful lights. All you have to do is have a method to get them so that they either have less, make sure you have a way to, but why don't people like, is it that passion? Is it that emotional element of like starting? Then all of a sudden logic and reason kicks in.
It's different for different people and it's different for different verticals,
right?
In different industries. Some industries, they don't make sense unless you get very systematic and the owner can't do it all. Like I've got a power washing company that got 60 employees. Like the owners, the model would never work. If you're a consultant, I'm not sure exactly what you do, Mike, but like if you're a consultant like me, you don't necessarily need to build up a team of 100 employees to build up a business that way. So a lot of it depends on the model. And I think also simplicity is really the key aspect. That's why we always stress that strategic objective. I have an electrician I'm working with right now in the UK, and he's saying, well, if my team did it this way and did it this way, and they upsold this and they made sure that they did this, then it'd be great. And I said, well, you got 20 years experience. You're an entrepreneur, very sharp, like most entrepreneurs are. Your team is not going to do it that way. They're just not. They're the young guys coming up doing electrical work. So you need to just say, hey, when you go to a house, here are the 3 upsell packages. Here's what you say. Here's what they cost. Just be consistent. Don't say, well, they could do this and they could do that. And the more complicated you make every aspect of your business, the less likely it is to scale. And I think that entrepreneurs and founders are great at seeing ways to add value in 100 different ways. And what they need to say is, let me just add value in the 3 ways that actually matter the most to my clients. And let's perfect that before we go to the next thing. And it's the slowing down and moving towards perfection that is hard. It's hard for entrepreneurs to slow down and do that because they can see the 20 other ways to make money, but you can't make money in a consistent way with a team that takes a while to onboard. So kind of a long answer to your question, but that's usually what I see the most often.
Well, and also I would imagine sustainability needs to be factored in as well. Most people think about consistency, but they don't think about how they can sustain it, right? So there's that too.
Yeah. And I mean, we live in a dynamic world, right? So people come and go, clients come and go, products innovate. It's not static, right? So when I'm helping companies develop systems, the more static their business, the more we can work on refining and perfecting, and the more dynamic the business, the more we're setting up guidelines and outlines and ways to scale that aren't so rigid, because we know that rigidity is not going to help them in this kind of environment. And there's a lot of ways to think through how that's going to happen, but it does actually matter based on the industry.
And then, and to that point, rigidity is very subjective too, depending on industry, right? Like there's certain things that have to be done a certain way that, then there's certain things that, you can, there's nuance, right? And that's the thing. It's the new. So before I let you go, obviously people can work with you directly. They can look into working with you directly. But if someone wants to start to implement work the system, it sounds to me like number one, you should set aside like time to like just focus on building this stuff as opposed to like, what's the ideal scenario if somebody's like, look, I'd love to work with Josh, but I can't right now, or you've got client full list or whatever, but I want to get started. What would be a simple way for somebody, we go back to simple, to get started putting this kind of systems mindset in place and systems themselves?
Yeah. So first thing, go to Sam Carpenter's website, right? Go get the book,
Yep.
workwithsystem.com. Simple enough. The other two exercises, if you own a company, I would say write that one-page strategic objective. So if you actually have clarity about where you're going to go and how you're going to get there, it's going to cut out all of the fluff. It's going to allow you to double down on what's going to work. And you're going to be picking clients strategically, technology strategically. Everything will be strategic because it's based on that, which should allow for systemization to happen faster. So that would be part of it. But in terms of just practical, you're a manager, you're an employee, you just like to be more efficient. What I recommend people do, and it's nothing too novel, is to write down every single thing you do for a couple of days and when it happened, how long it took, just so that you have a time study of this is actually where my time is going, because most people don't know that their most valuable asset, their time, is being squandered in all these different places. And so I let them know, hey, if each of these things is a separate piece that's going to be repeated, is there ways to do it better, faster, delegate it, batch it, remove it? And that frees up their time to then work on other systems. So that tends to be what I do practically, because I only work with people who are overly busy to begin with. And so if I don't build some capacity in their day to day and week to week, I'm not going to get very far. Because once they have that time, then I said, now let's take it and let's build out some of these systems.
Well, Josh, this has been a great conversation. Again, you've contributed to the book. This is the 4th edition. Again, it's called Work the System. Again, I've got to go through this book a bit in more detail than I have. The Simple Mechanics of Making More and Working Less. It's by Sam Carpenter, but you contributed to the case studies and the epilogue. Where can people keep up with you, get the book, and all the things related to what we're talking about here today?
Sure, yeah. So you can go to my website. It's WTSenterprises.com. And there, I give away a summary of the book is there. And of course, I have my own podcast and a few other things they can get. But that's the best way to find me and get a summary of the book.
Josh, thanks so much for having a productive conversation with me today.
Thanks, Mike.
Big thanks to Josh for joining me on the program today. You can check out all the show notes, relevant links, everything else at productivityist.com/podcast497. If you want to support the show, check out the sponsors that you heard during this episode. Just visit productivityist.com/podcast sponsors to make that happen. And there's one more step you can take to support this show, and that's hit the subscribe button wherever you are taking in this podcast. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you're listening to the show right now, subscribe, because that way you won't miss a single episode of what's to come, and you'll easily be able to access the archives without fail. So there you go. 2 ways to support the show. And with that, that's the end of this episode. Until next time, I'm Mike Vardy, the host of A Productive Conversation, reminding you to stop doing productive and start being productive. See you later.